Some people claim that the supernatural, that creation, that intelligent design are outside the bounds of science. This view is called methodological naturalism. And I could see how that perspective could actually fuel the perception that there is a conflict between science and the Christian faith. And I'm here with Mark Perez, who's a philosopher of science, to help us unpack this idea. Mark, first of all, what is methodological naturalism exactly, and how does that relate to a sister idea, if I could call it that, known as philosophical naturalism?
Methodological naturalism has a couple of different definitions, but to distinguish it mostly from philosophical naturalism, let me start with this one. Science has to perform its operations in some way or another. It's going to have a system of methods. And the methods are going to have some standard for evidence. So for example, when I come up with a solution to a problem and I want to share this problem with my peers, my scientific peers, they're going to look at it and assess it based on whatever that scientific discipline is. They all have standards for evidence. What methodological naturalism is it's a standard for measuring evidence. One of the things that it is. It's a standard for measuring evidence such that I don't accept the solution unless it comes from nature, that there's a natural solution to it. Now you can't really do science without starting there. If everything you do is to just throw your hands up and say, well, ghosts did it, then science isn't going to progress very far. And as a matter of fact, science didn't progress very far when everything was explicable in some kind of supernatural thing. So science got better when it became more methodologically natural. And the problem, though, arises when it instead of doing it only when it needs to, it does it because it has to. And what I mean by that is we go into philosophical naturalism in that philosophical naturalism says the only explanation that can possibly be will be from nature, no matter what you come up against. So methodological naturalism says, okay, this is the standard for evidence for my discipline. Philosophical naturalism says this is the standard for everything. And it presumes what we call in philosophy an ontology, that only certain kinds of entities can exist. Methodological naturalism all by itself doesn't, because it allows for the possibility that some entity that we haven't discovered yet may exist. Philosophical naturalism says, no, I'm sorry, that isn't the way it works. You can't think of something that isn't physical. So what do you do with problems like the origins problem, for example, where they're constantly running into problems that are inexplicable? And one way I look at it is, if you have a puzzle and you take all of the pieces out of the puzzle and one's still missing, the methodological naturalist is going to look for a puzzle piece, but if he says there's no more puzzle pieces left and yet there's still a gaping hole, he's going to go outside the box and say, well, is there another puzzle piece somewhere else? The philosophical naturalist says, nope. If you can't find that, it's in the box somewhere. Sure, you can't see it, but we know it's in the box. Really? How do you know that? How do you know that isn't wishful thinking? Well, there are ways of looking at that to determine whether it's wishful thinking. But the point is that methodological naturalism doesn't require that. It can look outside the box of the puzzle. Philosophical naturalism says the only thing you're going to be able to use on that puzzle is what's in that box. And if it's missing a piece, too bad.
So then how does this relate to the perception of conflict between science and the Christian faith?
Well, if I'm a philosophical naturalist, Christian faith can't talk to me because it's talking outside the puzzle box. It's trying to bring in a puzzle piece that doesn't come from the box itself. The only problem with that is if you don't look at it, you'll never know. So what if the puzzle piece I have actually fits perfectly, colors exactly with the rest of the puzzle, and fits in such a way that the person who actually created the puzzle says, that's the way it should have been to begin with. And by the way, all the rest of these puzzle pieces look just like the one I just put in there. Can't do it. The philosophical naturalist is absolutely stuck and would be incapable of getting truth, the truth, because of his a priori rejection of anything outside of the physical nature.
Now, as a scientist, I have to admit that many scientists are, and myself included to some degree, are not really very sophisticated when it comes to the philosophy of science. Very good at the practice of science, but not so good at the philosophy of science. And it's very easy, I think, to conflate philosophical naturalism with methodological naturalism. Speak about that, Mark. I mean, do you see that as being problematic, again, in terms of seeing this potential conflict between science and Christianity?
Yes, because methodological naturalism can be used ambiguously. It can refer to philosophical naturalism if you're not sophisticated in the understanding of what philosophical naturalism is. So if you're a scientist, for example, and you say, well, methodological naturalism is just the way we do work, and then you accidentally carry it to the philosophical notion that, well, if this is the way we do our work, we can't consider anything else, without thinking there may be a puzzle piece outside this puzzle box, then you're stuck. And you're going to have a problem, and it's going to be a very difficult problem, but it only arises because there's an ambiguity in the term and an ignorance of this other term and its work.